Thanks. Are we live? Okay. Hi. Good evening, folks. I'm Kevin Mitchell, and I'll be doing the presentation this evening. Just a little bit about me. I'm a glider pilot. I'm based down here in Cape Town, and I fly at the Cape Gliding Club in Worcester. I've been flying since about 2002. I own a DG 400, and for my sins, I'm currently the CFI in Worcester, or the Cape Gliding Club. And I've flown in a number of regionals and national contests in South Africa in my DG. And so the presentation today, I'm not sure if I had the title exactly what I was asked to make the title, but I'm sure the content will cover everything that's needed. I was initially approached by Francois du Toit of Magalies Gliding Club he was looking at putting some flying instruments or mobile flying instruments into some of the glass trainers at Magalies, and so that the students or the early GPL pilots can start flying with instruments and trying to improve their cross-country flying. And he approached me specifically to talk about the Oudie. The reason he approached me is I have a small business where I import. This is just a part-time business where I import a lot of different instruments and things related to gliding, or everything, in fact, from oxygen systems to parachutes, to clothing, to ground equipment, to various brands of instruments, and specifically the Oudie is one of the products that I do, or the Naviter products. So Francois asked me just to talk a little bit about it and to explain to people what the product's about and how they can use it to improve their decisions in cross-country flying, and hopefully improve their technique based on better decisions. Okay. All right. So just to explain what Naviter actually is. So Naviter is try to get the screen slide is not changing. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Naviter is a Slovenian company. It was started by two students, gliding students, who were very curious about where pilots were flying to and what they were doing while they were out there. So these two started up Naviter. They were software engineers, and they wrote a product most of you are probably familiar with, called CU. And CU is primarily a flight planning and analysis product, although it's now gone cloud-based and it's got a lot of other integrations into it. But what these guys did is they eventually ported the product across to a mobile device, and so was born the Oudie. And that was probably almost 20 years ago that the Oudie first came out. And the current guise of the product is either the Oudie 2 or the Oudie IGC. The IGC is the high-end device, which has IGC certified log files, engine noise detection. It has a pressure sensor in it, so it can give you QNH, or it can have an optional variable built in. Whereas the Oudie 2 is more commonly used, and the Oudie 2 is can also be used for uploading flights. It doesn't have an IGC certified GPS, so things like for claiming high-end badges, records, etc. You won't be able to use log files from the Oudie 2, as well as if you don't have an engine if you have an engine in your sail plane, then the Oudie 2 doesn't have engine noise detection. So if you upload flights from that device, it won't accept them in the case of having a motor. All right, so just a little bit more history. The one guy who started this company, he moved off from Naviter, joined a company called LX Navigation, and then he started up the company called LX Nav after that. So these are all Slovenian companies. So that's a bit of the history. So, okay, moving on. Okay, the Oudie, I'm going to be doing a demonstration of the Oudie, a live simulated demo of it in a moment. But just to have a look at this slide first, because I don't have maps in the demonstration. So in this particular screen, you can see it's an older screenshot because it doesn't have the high resolution maps where you can actually see in detail on the terrain or on the mountains. But what the screen shows you typically is how the Oudie can not only give you information in the form of nav boxes or a graphical representation, it will give you details about airspace, this particular screen, tell you when you're approaching airspace, are you in the airspace, you can mute it, you can disable it. So these features are just something you can pick up from that screenshot. The Oudie itself, it's suited really for cross-country pilots, as well as competition pilots. It has all the features for competition, all the advanced features that one needs for competition flying at the highest level. And cross-country pilots certainly for setting their own tasks, for helping them make good decisions when they're flying and ultimately improve their flying skills, which is really what this presentation is all about. And then, of course, for records or badge hunters, the Oudie is very suitable for that purpose. Okay. Just one thing I wanted to mention was the moderator said if you guys have got questions, then please send them through. He will pick them up and he will inform me when there's a question and we can answer them on the fly. We don't need to wait until the end to do questions. All right. Okay, so this is a bit of a ridiculous screenshot of an Oudie. You certainly wouldn't want all this information on your screen, and definitely less is more when it comes to the Oudie. That said, what you can do in an Oudie is you can replay your flight, or you can replay somebody else's flight that you've downloaded to your Oudie or downloaded to the SD card. And you can, what I've done before is I've sat on the couch at home and I've loaded up as many nav boxes as I can on one of the screens on my Oudie, and I've watched the flight and seen which nav boxes or which information boxes give interesting information as to stuff that I would want to see when I'm flying. But realistically, you don't want more than about 4 or 5 nav boxes on your screen when you're using an Oudie. Certainly less is more when it comes to flight computers. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on to the demo. All right, so let me just quickly bring it up on the screen here. There we go. Okay, so this is a typical Oudie. I don't have any terrain maps loaded in the background because it's firstly, I couldn't quite figure out how to do it on the simulator, and then secondly, it might not update that well on a Zoom call. So it's probably a good thing we don't have it. So what it's doing here is it's actually playing a demonstration. It's playing a demo file of a short flight that was done in Slovenia, and I'm just going to go through some of the things on the screen, and I'm going to show you what they represent and what they're trying to tell you. And then when I'm done with that, I'll actually stop the simulation, and what I'll do is load up a task, and we'll actually simulate flying a flight ourselves over a task and show you what sort of information the Oudie gives you. All right. Okay, so if we look at the screen, for starters, if you look in the top left-hand corner up there, what we've set up here is a wind direction. Oops, that would get in the way. We set up wind direction and wind speed with an arrow, so you can move that to any position in the screen you want. But that's showing us a wind direction of 189 and a speed of 14. We can change our the way we're looking. I've currently got north up, so the screen doesn't spin around in circles during the presentation. But typically, when you're flying, I certainly prefer having heading up. But that obviously depends on your preferences. Let's go down to the left here. You probably are quite familiar with McCready theory. So what we've got set here is we've got a McCready of 2 set. There is an easy way to change that McCready. And on the left of that, we've got a final glide calculator. So what this is showing you here is that the chevrons here are showing you below, which means that you're under the glide. We don't have a task set here, so it's not giving us any more information besides whether we're below or above glide. But if you're above glide, it'll show it going up. When we do the task later, you'll see 2 numbers that will appear here, which will show you how many feet or meters you are above glide on McCready 2 and how many feet or meters you are below glide on McCready 0. So you can do quite a quick comparison there. Something else on the screen in the top right, that's your scale. So we've currently got the scale set. We've got the zoom set to 100 kilometers if you look in the bottom left. And so at the top, it's just showing you 10 as the scale relevant to 100 Ks. You'll see the screen is zooming in as the plane circles or azothermals. So this is a feature on the Oudie called the thermal maximizer or the thermaling maximizer. And what that enables people to do is to have a look at their track. Hopefully it'll pop up again while I'm talking. And you can see when you're in a thermal, to what extent you are coring the thermal, whether you're falling out the thermal. The Oudie also gives you audio feedback as to when you're hitting the strongest part of the thermal, and then you can shift your circling to be closer to the core of the thermal. It'll come up again in a moment, and we'll be able to look at that a bit more carefully. Just keep in mind that I'm running this replay at 5 times real time, so if you see things going around a bit fast, that's why. Okay, so here's an example. The log file is not logging one every second, so that's why it's a bit jaggedy. So you can see here, this particular glider is circling in the thermal. You can see he's drifting in the wind direction that's indicated at the top there. And he seems to be calling it fairly well, because the red or the orange, okay, now he's falling out of it and off he goes again. So, so that gives you an idea of how the thermal maximizer works. The next thing I wanted to show you is, if you look at these turn points here, this is Lienz in Austria, I guess, and it shows you a little box next to it with a number. Now that number represents the glide ratio required to reach that turn point. So there's a configuration item where you can set the polar of the glider that you're flying, and depending on what the glider is that you're flying and what the polar is, that little box will light up in green or in yellow or in red, depending whether you can glide to it. So I've got it configured, I think, as a single aster, and obviously a single aster can make 14:1 on glide. So Lienz shows up as a green, a landable point, highlighted in green. If I zoom out a little bit more, let's go to 200 kilometers. You'll see some other turn points don't have any little green boxes next to them because they're not reachable based on our current altitude. Okay. All right, so let's see what else we need to, okay. What I just want to show you while you're here, and I know it was one of Francois' requests with regard to how to set up an Oudie. So if you get an Oudie, and let's say you've loaned the Oudie from somebody, or you've bought your own Oudie, or you're using a club Oudie, then there's just a couple of simple things you need to do when you first get it to tailor it for yourself. There's nothing really to do from an installation perspective. It's just a couple of configuration options. So I'm just going to go through those quickly. So first thing you'd want to do is you would want to go and, let's say it's a new Oudie, for example, you would want to go and change the units of the Oudie. So you're going to jump in, you're going to go in, you're going to go into your units, you're going to set it as metric, because it may arrive with imperial or something else. And you're going to want to change your altitude to feet or meters. We'll leave it at meters for now. And that's pretty much all you've got to do on that side. Once you've done the units, you might want to go and set up the polar for the aircraft that you're flying in. So we go and select the polar under settings. And in this case, we've selected an Aster CS, but there is a list of almost every glider you can imagine in here. Then you could select that, and that will assign the polar for the active session that you're running. Just keep in mind that these things, there's different profiles that you have on an Oudie. So if you're flying different gliders with the same instrument, or different pilots and different gliders with the same instrument, you can set up a number of profiles so that when you start up the device, you select the profile and all that information is pre-configured for you. Something that's important to do if you're borrowing an Oudie, or if you've bought an Oudie, is to go into a section called Files. And this is where you would, the Oudie does come preloaded with terrain maps and satellite maps of AF, or the whole world for that matter. The NOTAMs is a subscription service. I don't think it's available in South Africa yet. your waypoint files. You can load waypoint files here. The waypoint files you can find on the Soaring Turnpoint database, the worldwide Soaring Turnpoint database, which has turnpoint files for pretty much all the sites in South Africa and the rest of the world for that matter. So you could download the file and pop it in here. Another thing you'd need to do is, actually that's about it. Your airspace, CU has keeps the worldwide airspace updated. Normally someone from each country keeps the airspace updated. In the case of CU, I do it for South Africa. But generally the airspace will be up to date. Every time you update the firmware on the Oudie, the airspace will automatically update again as well. Okay, so the other thing that you might want to check, what's quite important, is your altitude reserve, or your safety altitude. So it's currently set to 100 meters. I think we'll change that to about 300 meters. It's probably a more sensible safety altitude. So that basically when you navigate into your turn point, you want to arrive at circuit height and not at necessarily 100 meters above the ground, which is certainly not enough height to do a full circuit. Okay, so I think I'm going to move on to setting up the task now. So let me just, there were a couple of screenshots, a couple of screens that I wanted to show you. So on the Oudie, if you, this button down at the bottom here will give you various things that you can switch on and off during your flight. So you could tell it to show you where how to fly FAI triangles, you know, where's the 100, where's the 300, where would I have to fly to get that? Hopefully I'll get an opportunity to show that to you. Let me try that quickly. If I select FAI and then I zoom out, let's zoom out to about 200 kilometers. There we go. So now you could see if you were flying a task, and we don't have the distance circles here. Let me make it even more. Okay. Oh dear. Okay. Anyway, each of those lines will represent a different distance, and as long as you go into the sector here, you will be able to you will be achieving 100 or 300 FAI triangle. Okay. Right. So let's just take that off again. Things like OLC optimization, whether you want your waypoints shown, whether you want to disable all your nav boxes on the screen so you have a nice clear screen while you're flying. These are all options that are available via that button. The other thing that's important is the go-to button down at the bottom here. Now, this will select all the turn points in your database, and you can sort them out based on distance away from you. You could sort them out on bearing, you could sort them out on the type. So for example, here, I've only got landable turn points or airports. So if I wanted to filter on types, I could say I only want landable types. I could enable that, and now it'll only show me turn points or airports that I can land at. You could then sort that on distance, and you could see all the closest landable turn points. And if they're yellow, it means they're possibly achievable. If they're green, it means they're definitely achievable based on the polar of the glider that you have configured. Okay, all right. So I think there are a couple of statistics screens that this button enables. On the second graphical screen, I've got distance circles enabled. For those of you that have flown with maps, you'll be quite familiar with distance circles. So that's quite a nice feature. Another screen that will give you statistics on your flights. Altitude, that's not a super useful screen. Next one, this is quite useful. This gives you your previous 4 or 5 thermals and gives you the average. So it'll help you making decisions, help you to make decisions on your McCready setting for your flight. And also some average speeds, cross-country speeds, distance, etc. Okay, then back to that screen. All right, let me now load up a task. Not sure how we're doing time-wise, Brendan. Are we okay? Okay, 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 good. When does everybody go to sleep? At 25 minutes? Okay. Okay, all right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to load up a task quickly based on the turn points that are in this demo. And so very simple to load a task on an Oudie. You just type in the turn point names. I'm going to put a 3 kilometer start line in here. And then my next turn point, I'm going to put in Lesk. Where they often have national contests in Slovenia. And we'll turn that into a 500 meter, I think we'll make it 500 meter cylinder. The next one, I'm going to add a place called Neza. We'll make that a 1 kilometer, cylinder as well. And then finally, we'll go back to Jamnik, and we'll make that a 2 kilometer cylinder, which is quite common for finishers these days, is to make a cylinder as opposed to a start line, as opposed to a finish line. Okay, so that's the task, and it's as simple as that to set up a task on an Oudie. All right, so let's. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually. There's a very neat option on an Oudie which is called the input option under the settings, and you can either replay a file from your logbook, like I just have been playing a demo file, or you can use the internal GPS, and that's typically how you would fly normally by selecting serial. The reason it says serial and not internal GPS, let me just mention that, is that you can have an Oudie connected. It can either use its internal GPS, which it will do if you select serial, but the alternative is that you have the Oudie plugged into an external serial connection, like an external instrument on your panel. So a lot of people have Oudies plugged into either into their FLARM or into a logger, and that's got pressure inputs such as total energy or static or pitot, and it'll take that pressure information, including outside internal temperature type information or outside temperature information, and enhance the statistics that it's providing you based on that pressure information. So and also it can pull in FLARM targets, so you can get a FLARM display on your screen which will show you where the FLARM targets are and give you audio warnings as well as graphical warnings as to where the other traffic is, including information on their climb rates, etc., etc. So that's quite a useful thing. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to, now that I've set up a task, I'm going to simulate us flying the task. I'm going to set us at a flying altitude of 500 meters. I'm going to set a start point for where the glider must start from, and then we're going to get that going so I can show you the task. Okay, so we're a little bit far out here. So if I zoom in here, all right, so there's our task that I set up. So what this is, there's our start line. That's, what was it, a 3 kilometer start line. There's our route that we need to go on the task. So you fly up to Lesk. From Lesk you go across to Neza, and from Neza back to Jamnik. It's a very short task, so it'll only take a couple of minutes for us to fly it. But what I am going to do is I'm going to speed up the glider significantly so that it flies there in a very quick time. So I've got the glider flying at 860 kilometers at the moment. So what I am going to switch off is I'm going to switch off the track of the glider. Otherwise, it starts to get a bit messy on the task. So what I showed you earlier is you have these options. So I'm going to switch the track off. And then you can see there's a little pink line showing the glider to the start line. And as we move further and further across the start line, you can see the pink line is showing us to the most optimal point. So as we get a bit closer, what I'm going to do is now I'm going to fly the glider en route, on course, and you'll see the glider as it crosses over the start line. Let me zoom in a little bit. As it crosses over the start line, you'll see what the Oudie actually does, and it gives you information to tell you that you've started. And often you're looking around, you're looking out of the cockpit, you need these audio alerts. So there it started. You can now say, yes, I accept the start. If you don't accept the start, or you just ignore this message, you can see it's directing you back to the start line, so you can go and start again. So let's say we'll use the start. So now what it does, it now directs us to the first turn point that we've got in our task. It shouldn't take us too long to get there, and it'll start giving you stats as to what the distance is. I'm going to change the zoom. Actually, I won't do it just yet, because what it does do is if you set the zoom to a mode called target, it'll enlarge the turn point as you get to the turn point, so you can make it easier to see when you've snagged the turn point or not. So let me just make sure we don't miss this turn point. So the reason it's not enlarging the turn point now is because I've got it set to a fixed 10 kilometers. All right, so that now it's changed the turn point to Neza, which is the next turn point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the zoom to target, if it finally gets there. All right, yeah, okay. All right, let's take it back to 20. This could be a glitch in the simulator. So what it would normally do is, as it gets closer to the turn point, it'll enlarge the turn point more and more and more until such time as it's a decent size that you can see when you've snicked the turn point. That little green dot there tells you when you'll end up on final glide for this task. So you, whoopsie. So you'll find that. Okay, now it's auto zooming. Okay, so you should see a message as we pass that green dot to say we no longer need to thermal, we're now on final glide for the task. Let's see if it does that. There we go. So we're now on final glide. We're now coming up to the end of the task, and it gives us a 2-minute warning. So now we can inform the competition director, if it may be, that we're 2 minutes out, or just the airport, just for information purposes. And then the glider flies in and it crosses over the finish cylinder, and then you will get a status message from the Oudie telling you that you have finished. So you can stop, you can release the stick off the front stop, and your speed, which you can see is quite impressive in our case. Okay. All right. So that's really it from the demo perspective. I hope I've showed enough. I think what's important to mention, I think it was on one of the things that Francois wanted me to discuss, was uploading flights from the Oudie. There's a couple of ways of doing it. The flights get written to the internal flash on the Oudie. They also get written to the SD card, which plugs in the top here somewhere. And you can take the SD card out and you can upload your flights to the competition or to OLC, whatever need be. Something I didn't mention, which is quite a nice feature of the Oudie, it has a thing called Oudie Live. And what Oudie Live enables you to do is connect it to, I think it's only supports Android at this stage, but you can connect it to a phone. And then Oudie Live becomes an internet proxy on the device. And then you're able to do live tracking while you're flying. You can upload your position. If your Oudie is connected to a FLARM, it'll upload your position to OGN. And if you're connected to a FLARM, it'll upload other people's positions to OGN as well. So it acts as a relay, or even a FLARM base station or OGN base station by relaying other people's positions to OGN. Soaring Spot is for competitions. If you want to download your tasks from the competition, it'll automatically pull your tasks down to the Oudie, so you don't need to sit and manually capture your tasks onto your Oudie. CU Cloud is a subscription facility from CU. Once you have the subscription, you get access to CU and you get access to a lot of other features, including the ability to upload flights to the cloud, to a logbook from your Oudie. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it from the Oudie. Let me shut down the simulation. Yep, there we go. And I think I've got one or two other slides and then we're done. All right, so I think it's important to get familiar with your instrument. The Oudie is a very useful flight instrument in the sense that there's very little you have to do. You can just get out there and fly with it as long as you've got turn points loaded. You can just go out and fly with the device and get to know it slowly. But one of the big advantages is you can bring it home. You can sit at home and you can configure it to your heart's delight if that's what you like doing, or you can simulate flights, you can replay flights, you can configure it to show you whatever information you want, and get to know the device at home, get familiar with it, that when you're in the glider, you don't have to stare at the instrument. You can just make it work for you and keep your eyes out the cockpit. Okay. Obviously, talk to pilots that have them. Pilots that have got other instruments like LXNav 9000s, etc. The functionality of the instruments is very similar, keeping in mind that the developers came from the same background. So it's very similar. So the features and things are quite similar. So people understand what you're talking about. There are a bunch of tutorials and training videos out there. And yeah, and by all means, ask me some questions, or you can even talk to Naviter themselves. The guys are quite helpful with questions, with answering your questions. Okay, I think that's my presentation. That's done. So thanks, guys. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll answer the first question. The first question was, did I have any pictures of it installed? Is that correct, Brennan? Okay. So I think that's a good question to answer now, because if you look at the picture on the screen right now, there is an Oudie that's mounted on a I think it's a RAM mount. The Oudie does ship with its own suction cup mount, which you can either put onto the side of the canopy, or you can stick it onto your panel. Either if you have enough space on your panel, you can mount it with the cradle that ships with the Oudie directly onto your panel, or you can put it on a stick mount or a RAM mount, mounted onto the side of your panel. So it normally sticks out in front of your panel by 30-40 centimeters or less. Or you can put it on, depending if you have any eyesight issues, you could need glasses, you could mount the instrument closer or further according to where you want it. So hopefully that answers the first question. Sorry, just remind me of the second question, please, Brendan. Okay. Yeah, yeah. So the second question was, are there any costs for using the Oudie? The Oudie has a lifetime license. So when one purchases the Oudie, you get a lifetime license to use it. That said, there are, as with many software applications out there, many of these companies are leaning towards subscription features. The Oudie has stayed away from that. However, they are starting to bring some advanced features in, such as being able to get weather, the likes of either Top Meteor or SkySight. You can download weather to your Oudie, and then it'll give whatever the forecasted weather will be overlaid on your Oudie while you're flying. So now that's not a subscription feature from. Yes, sorry, it is. It is, yes. So if you want that feature, you need to have what they call the Naviter subscription. The Naviter subscription gives you a bunch of different access. You get the CU product, you get the ability to upload advanced features to your Oudie, such as weather. And then you also obviously need a feature for the weather provider. You also need a license for the weather provider, whether it be SkySight or Top Meteor, etc. So to fly with an Oudie, cross-country or in competitions, the answer is no, you don't need a subscription. But as the advanced features are starting to come through, there will start being subscriptions required, but not for the basic functionality of the Oudie as we've known it for the last 20 years. And for new firmware updates, etc., there's definitely no subscription required for that. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So, sure. Okay. I don't know the abbreviation ITR, but I understand the question. So the question was, can is the ability to run CU on an Android phone like you can with XCountry, etc. The answer is no. The Oudie software, the software that runs on the Oudie is called CU Mobile. CU Mobile is traditionally, you can run it on a PDA or a PNA, but you would have to buy the license. You couldn't get the software for free. So if you bought the Oudie, you got the lifetime software for free. But if you wanted to run it on a PDA or PNA, then you would have to buy the license to run the CU software. That's a lifetime license, but you would need to buy it once off. These days, they've changed that to actually needing to buy the subscription, which is about 49 euros a year. So if you're not running it on the Oudie hardware, then you do need a subscription to run the software. The software does not run on Android or iOS, although there are versions of CU for those products, but it's not the fully fledged flight instrument. So I hope that answers the question. Okay. Yeah, no, by all means, guys, give me a shout or a call if you've got any questions, need some help with your instrument, etc. All right, all the best. Thanks, guys.